Senator John Thune is the co-sponsor of a bill that would stop the bonuses for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac executives. He is joining us on Capitol Hill tonight. Senator Thune, thanks very much for being with us.
Great to be with you, Steve. Thanks.
Specifically, what's in this bill?
Well, what we found out is last fall, of course, that the American people discovered that the Federal Housing Finance Agency had approved nearly $13 million in bonus pay for executives at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and I think that was something that when they looked at their performance over that same time period and the fact that they're $150 billion into taxpayer assistance, and there was a lot of outrage across the country, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both during that same time period announced that they had posted big losses and that there was going to need to be additional taxpayer infusions of money. And so, we wrote a letter challenging the issuance of those bonuses, but what this is a legislative effort that would not only deal with the bonuses that are unpaid from last year and going forward and essentially freeze those and apply any of the savings to the national debt, but also going forward put the executives at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into the same sort of salary structure that applies to some of the other financial regulators like the OCC, the FDIC, the SEC, and so it caps salaries basically at $275,000 a year. So it responds to something that I think the American people found to be very outrageous and sort of moves the compensation packages at these two agencies into more what's in line with some of the other financial regulatory institutions in this country.
But as you well know, some would argue that that salary is necessary to keep and maintain some of these executives, whether it's their pay or their bonuses.
Right, and I think I understand that, and I think that by and large, a lot of the people who serve in government agencies do so because they're very interested and believe in public service. And it seems at least that $275,000 salary would be a sufficient incentive for people who's really interested in public service and wants to help turn an institution around, wants to be part of solving a big problem. I think there are a lot of people out there who've done well in the private economy that would be very interested in. And so I don't think it's going to limit the talent pool that's available to these two agencies. But I think more importantly, it does do a lot to help restore the confidence and trust of the American people that there aren't executives who, at a time when our economy is struggling, and at a time, too, when these two agencies continue to hemorrhage money and require taxpayer assistance, that they're paying out big bonuses and big compensation packages. And it did pass the House of Representatives, some very similar piece of legislation, at least the Financial Services Committee over there, by a strong margin of 52-4. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to get a vote on it in the Senate.
Senator Thune, when you first heard about these bonuses last November, what was your reaction? How many individuals were involved, and how much money?
Well, I was, I think, like a lot of Americans, pretty outraged. There were 10 executives, $13 million paid out, so well in excess of $1 million per executive. And, I think at the time, it was right about that time that both Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae requested additional assistance from the federal government. They both announced losses, and it seemed, I think, to most people that if you're paying people for good performance, that's one thing if they're getting bonuses, but when your organizations continue to lose money and continue to require additional taxpayer assistance, that's not a time to be paying out these excessive bonuses. So this was in response to that, and I think what we heard from people when that story broke and that news got out was just a lot of outrage, and I think it was justified.
And let me ask you about what the support you have or maybe trying to get. Do you have bipartisan support for this legislation? Will Republicans and Democrats sign on to this, and will it pass with the 60-plus votes necessary in the U.S. Senate?
We'll see. We've got bipartisan support. It's a bill that both, Mark Begich, who's a senator from Alaska, and I have introduced, and we've been picking up co-sponsors. I think we have somewhere on the order of 20 co-sponsors right now, both Democrat and Republican, and I hope that we can add to that. It is something that's even right now being debated. There's an amendment offered by Senator McCain on the floor to the current legislation that we're debating now that would prevent the bonuses from being paid, I guess, going forward. But what ours would do is also set compensation levels at a more reasonable level going forward. So it goes a little bit farther than that, but it's still very much, I think, a part of the national discussion, and especially when any news comes out about those two agencies, and there's been plenty of that in the news here in the last, continues to be in the last several weeks.
We're talking with Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota. Part of this Republican debate has been taking aim at Dodd-Frank. Do you sense in the next Congress that Dodd-Frank faces a potential repeal?
Yeah, I think it's possible that there will be attempts to do that, and certainly, if not repeal all of it, portions of it, but try and deal with the issue of too big to fail and with systemically risky institutions at least. But there is a widely held view, certainly among Republicans in Congress, that Dodd-Frank went too far, was much more far-reaching, and is going to create a lot of problems and challenges, particularly for smaller institutions in this country. I know it's certainly something I hear about in my state, from community banks, credit unions. There's a lot of concern, and because in many cases the regulations that implement Dodd-Frank are still in the process of being developed and written about what that might look like. But clearly there were some things in that legislation that caused great concern among not just the larger financial institutions in this country, but many of the smaller ones, and some that are not even necessarily in that business, but could fall under the regulation that the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, for example, might put out. So there's still, it's something that I think you'll see an effort on if there is a change in the leadership in the Congress after the next election and a change in the White House.
And Senator Thune, before we let you go, one political question. You've been on the campaign trail supporting Mitt Romney, the primary yesterday in Florida. Newt Gingrich vowing to stay in this race through the convention. From your perspective, how long do you think the Republican Party will see a competitive primary leading up to the convention in Tampa?
It depends, I think, entirely on whether or not other candidates can continue to raise the resources that are necessary to go on. And, as each state goes by, you got to go to the next one, and that takes organization and resources. And I think a campaign that was built for the long haul is probably better prepared and positioned to survive till we get to the convention. But, I know that Speaker Gingrich announced after the election yesterday in Florida that he's going to continue on. He's going to continue all the way to the convention, and we'll see. I think that that's the prerogative of any candidate, but there are certain, I think, realities that candidates run into as these races wear on, and one is, can you continue to raise the resources that are necessary to wage a campaign through the many states that are still to come, and that we'll see. I, as you said, endorsed Governor Romney. I would like to see him become the nominee, and probably sooner rather than later, but I certainly respect the process that we have for picking a nominee, and we'll see it through and see what happens in the next few weeks.
And for you personally and your family, as you watch this primary process unfold, you had thought about potentially running for the presidency. As you see this up close and personal, what do you think?
Well, it's quite a process to observe. I think there's more. You look at what the candidates what they go through, the number of debates that they've been through. It is that's why you have to be totally committed, 100%, 24/7 into this thing, and that's why I think it does definitely narrow out and winnow out some of the candidates who think about it, consider it, but ultimately choose not to. And I came close to that decision and decided not to do it. I'm comfortable with my decision, but as I've observed these campaigns go forward, it certainly is a reminder that you better be all in when you're going to do this, because you certainly have to give it everything you got.
South Dakota Senator John Thune, thanks very much for joining us on Capitol Hill tonight.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Steve.